Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video, and today we're going to be starting Book 2 Spirits, and that means we're going to be reviewing the first episode, K201 Rebel Spirit. A notable thing here with this is that it's the first episode we're going to get of the series that is animated by a different animation studio. All of Book 1 and most of the other books are animated by Studio MIR, M-I-R, the Korean studio, which is the main one, and I think their team eventually was formed from some of the teams that worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender. Whereas this episode and 6 others from this book are animated by Studio Pierrot, P-I-E-R-R-O-T, who are mainly known as an anime studio. They did Bleach, Naruto, and loads of other anime. They're a very well-known studio. They're a big studio. Now, I think we need to talk about it here because if you look back at the run of the show, the question obviously is, why did this happen? Why is there only 7 episodes from this entire series that are animated by this one studio? What happened there? And this is where I think the story of why Studio Pierrot came on board is actually interesting, because Book 2 was pretty heavily criticized for having this different animation studio. I personally have never had too much of a problem with their quality of animation. I think they do a really good job considering the kind of context of how they came on board with the show and what happened with Studio MIR at the time. Especially with this episode, I was just kind of like, this is good. You can tell it's a different style. I think you can tell it's more of an anime studio doing it, and they're kind of having to adapt to the slightly different Korra style that's different than most anime. But I think they do a really good job. Of course, there are times where you can freeze frame it and the character model looks kind of different than it does in say Book 1 or the later books. But that's just what you're always going to get with a different animation studio. For me, the benefits of them coming on board at the time when they did work, because otherwise, who knows when we would have got this book, because this is the story with this. If anyone has been around for the entire run of Korra, from when it aired to when it finished, you'll know that when Book 1 finished, we knew there was another book coming. We basically very quickly got news that there was going to be 3 more books. The problem, though, is that because of the scheduling of all of this, it took a very long time for Book 2 to actually come out. There was a 15 or so month gap between Book 1 and Book 2, and during that time, we heard very little information about the show. We weren't really sure at all what was happening, and the updates that we were getting weren't giving us any real insight into when the show was actually coming back, and so on. And it turns out that I suppose what we've more or less learned since then is that there was an issue that happened with production during this time. And the main issue was that Studio MIR, who were the animators for Book 1, were basically on board to come back, but then they basically made this decision that, okay, instead of animating Book 2 of Korra, what we're actually going to do is we're going to animate, I think it was Season 3 of one of their other shows that they were doing at the time, Boondocks, and they decided, I think temporarily, not to do Korra. I don't know if the full deal was that they weren't even going to do Book 3 or 4, but at the very least there was just, in their scheduling, they couldn't fit in a lot of these earlier Book 2 episodes into their schedule. And so, to keep production on track at all, and already, as I said, it was a 15-month gap, they had to get a new studio on board, and so they went to one of the big animation studios, Studio Pierrot. The huge studio, of course, they could do it. But as I said, they have to adapt to a very different art style. It's not just stock anime. They have to do it a kind of bit more kind of deluxe animation in a way, because that's the quality that the show actually has. And they have to adapt to all of the different character designs quite quickly, because they're basically acting as a fill-in studio, because Studio MIR kind of altered things. So they came on board. And basically the story is more or less the Studio MIR then decided that, okay, wait, there's another animation studio doing Korra, so their work doesn't sort of impact on ours, in that if they do a bad job, it'll sort of reflect badly on Studio MIR, that you guys left this show and then this other studio came on board, what happened? They sort of came back in then for book 2 to do like beginnings and then most of the second half of the season, and stayed on board after that. And so Studio Pierrot wasn't really needed anymore. So the interpretation I've always had is that book 2 probably would have taken like 2 years or so. Between book 1 and book 2, there might have been almost like 2 years of a wait if we didn't have Studio Pierrot come on board. And that would have been a really rough thing. Already the 15-month wait was quite rough. I think it really did impact the fandom, in that Korra went from, I think, being this huge thing, the excitement around book 1, to really diminishing by the time book 2 finally came out, just because it was such a long wait. I think if they didn't get Studio Pierrot, that would have been this insane thing that I think really would have had a huge impact on the show overall, because scheduling problems do impact the fandoms and the kind of popularity of shows. So to me, I give them some level of credit and leniency a little bit, just because without them, who knows what situation book 2 would have actually been in. They came on board to make amends for basically Studio Mir refusing or making some decision not to work on the show initially. And so I kind of praise them a little bit, because they came on board very suddenly just to do 7 episodes, and I think their work is overall very good as we'll go through it. But yeah, Rebel Spirit. I like the animation, as I've said, and I actually like the episode. I know a lot of people don't like book 2 overall, outside of maybe a couple of episodes, but I actually really like the early sections of book 1, because I'll always say with book 2, what makes it my favorite book of Korra is that its themes that it covers are just, I think, so well executed over the course of the season. It has its problems, of course, but its themes of spirituality and family are very well done. And we see that immediately here with Tenzin and his brother and sister being introduced, and that sense of family. We'll get into the idea of him and his own family also kind of needing to kind of get some development. Korra and her family, Korra and her friends, Unalaq and his family, the brother relationship between Unalaq and Tonraq. There's a lot of dynamics that they immediately present to us here that as the book progresses, you see they really develop it, and they make it into this idea of like spirituality and family, and how you can incorporate the two together. But the core of this is that obviously we find out that spirits are attacking in southern waters. Unalaq kind of explains that this is the spirits kind of showing that they're angry at the South for not being spiritual anymore, and sort of forgetting about their kind of spiritual past. As we get a basically kind of recap of like where everyone is now. We're like 6 months on. There's been a 6-month time skip between the end of the last book and this book. Where are we? And so we find out that Mako's a cop now. He's joined the police force and is doing quite well. Bolin hasn't really found what he's going to do next. He's just sticking with the pro-bending, but it's not working because Mako and Korra are doing different things. Korra's been focused on her training with airbending and the Avatar state and so on. And then we see that Asami is trying to get the Future Industries back on track after the huge PR issue it had after Hiroshi was revealed to be working with the Equalists. And that's the kind of core dynamic of like immediately kind of setting up some stuff that like Mako and Korra have been together as a couple for 6 months, and as we see, they actually get on quite well. There's a few very kind of cute, kind of well done scenes between the two of them, of just like Mako talking about like what it's like working with the police force, and how like I took down these kind of bad guys and I said this line to them, and Korra's pretty impressed. Like, did you write it down? And she gives him a hint for like what his next kind of one-liner should be. And I think it's at this point we get the core development. I know a lot of people don't like Korra in these early book 2 episodes. I actually quite like it. I get that she can come across as very difficult and to a degree like annoying, but I'm a little bit more understanding of, I suppose, her position and where she's coming from, and so I get why she is the way she is at this point. And so I've always kind of interpreted it as like, I actually like this development, that they're not afraid to sort of make Korra a little bit dislikable, but also be like, yeah, there's a reason she's like this, and that no one's like giving her any respect, and so she sort of comes across a little bit as disrespectful, when it's just a case of her frustration with like the way everyone's treating her, in that we immediately get this idea that she's been for basically the past 6 months only focused on training. We immediately, when Unalaq arrives, get the idea that her father and Tenzin have kept any news of basically any incidents in the world away from her, mainly the spiritual issue, which they know about. And then, most notably, I think the most understandable thing to explain Korra here is when Unalaq reveals that the reason you didn't have a normal avatar training is because the reason you were in that compound the entire time is because your father and Tenzin made the decision to keep you there. And Korra this is a like huge sort of like betrayal moment for her. I think it's sort of underestimated, I think, by a lot of the fandom, just how meaningful this reveal is to Korra, in that she's always wanted to be the Avatar, but she's sort of been hindered from being the Avatar by having such a sort of sheltered upbringing as the Avatar. She's got all of the training down, but she doesn't have any experience with basically the rest of the world. That's why book 1 is such a struggle for her, because it's her first time in a big city. It's her first time in Republic City. And now she's suddenly like having to basically adapt to like northern water tribe politics, which she's not familiar with for the most part. And all this other stuff, having to deal with the president, and she hasn't kind of met him just quite yet. And it's just, she's been hindered because she doesn't have the experiences that other avatars would have by traveling the world. And they're hindering her from even learning that at this point in time. So it's just this weird situation that she's in, where she wants to get to a point where she can be involved in all of these incidents happening as the Avatar. That's her role. But what does it mean when she's just kind of, everything's kept away from her? She's just stuck in this sort of training mode. And especially after book 1, where Tenzin sort of, over the course of the end of that book, gave her a decent amount of praise for how she handled things. Calling her Avatar Korra as one of like the final moments of book 1 as meant to be this huge confidence booster moment. But then it seems like it immediately goes back to this dynamic of Korra is in training. She's not the Avatar really anymore. We can't let her do Avatar stuff because she has to learn airbending. And that's where the frustration comes in. That's what she immediately says to Mako when he talks about, you know, his work being a cop. She's just like, oh, that's so cool that you're doing that. I'm just like stuck training, doing airbending the entire time. They won't let me do anything. She wants to be involved in the thick of it and help to solve the problems, but she's not being allowed to by the people who are kind of meant to be helping her. And that's where the development in this book ends up going. By the end of the book, Korra is sort of given that respect. They trust her decision making a little bit more. And that's why it's in a way difficult to kind of watch Korra go through this in the early episodes, because it's her very kind of clearly like going at people about this, of just like wanting to be respected but not being given it, and it coming across as her being disrespectful, when it's in a way the other characters sort of like disrespecting her, or just seeing her as a kid when she is in fact the Avatar. And what level of respect are you meant to give the Avatar? Should the president not need to work with her when it comes to these type of things? And so this is where her gravitation towards Unalaq becomes a major plot point of like, here's someone who suddenly comes in and is giving her that respect, is listening to what she has to say, is giving her the information that she needs and wants, and is offering her the training that she actually wants to know about. Unalaq is kind of giving her basically everything she needs, and then all of a sudden Tenzin and her father are in the background being like, no, we're going ahead with your training. You don't need to learn from him because I can teach you that, or, you know, this person can teach you that. And especially I think with Tenzin, when we learn that he's not actually very spiritual, it's kind of like, what were you hoping to teach her? Like, I think we get the idea that he, just in terms of like knowledge, knows spiritual stuff, but he can't firsthand like really teach her anything because he doesn't really have any connection to the spirits. He doesn't have any like special abilities that relate to the spirits that would assist Korra. It's just him going more or less from books in a way, and some experience that he has with them. He's not suited to be her spiritual teacher. And that's a development arc for Tenzin within this book, is learning to accept that he can't be her teacher on that front. And so immediately that's a flaw of Tenzin at this point, and her father, is accepting, not being able to accept that as much. And you can clearly see for Tonraq, it's coming from a position of his own issues with his brother basically getting in the way of any sort of a teacher relationship Korra and Unalaq can have. And then I think it is Tenzin perhaps being a little bit over defensive about like, no, I want to be the one to teach the Avatar. That's what I consider to be my destiny, and then here's this person coming in. So I get it. Like, yes, what Korra does towards the end of the episode is a bit harsh of basically, going ahead with the teaching with Unalaq and kind of in a way separating herself from Tenzin, but it's harsh, and I agree it's harsh, but she has just been told something that is about a lie, basically about a key decision in her life that basically determined her path from like 4 or 5 years old. And that is that decision to keep her in the compound to do all of her Avatar training. That lie, I don't think it can be underestimated how meaningful that is to her, and how much of a betrayal finding out about this at this point in time is to her. That why haven't they told her this? And they lied, saying that like Aang was the one who suggested this. That's a problem. We obviously address it a bit more in the next episode, and we address, I suppose, Korra also being a bit apologetic about like her behavior. But I think it's a bit more understandable than I think a lot of people are about this, because yes, I think with Mako she sort of takes it a little bit out on him, but it's also a case of like he respects her, but Mako himself doesn't have the answers to her problems, because her problems aren't just like communication problems with their relationship or anything like that. Her problems are like Avatar problems about like, what should I do in terms of my role as the Avatar going forward, Mako? And he's just kind of like, okay, like he's struggling within himself about like, should I support her as a person, or should I just be thinking more about what I think the Avatar should do? And by the end, I think, he's like, I trust whatever decision you're going to make, because I know your heart's in the right place. And that was the right decision, and I like that she sort of apologizes in the next episode, as we'll get to. But I suppose we'll talk about the moment that really, I suppose, puts Korra over the edge, and that is the Rebel Spirit from the episode title attacks and just takes everyone out. We get to see some pretty cool bending. Mako and Bolin jump into action a little bit. Korra gets a chance to shine. Tonraq gets a chance to shine, showing his sort of unique, kind of aggressive waterbending style, which is quite good. But you can see, I think, the pluses and minuses of him immediately. He jumps in to protect his daughter, but as we begin to see, I suppose, over the next couple of seasons, is it a case of him being overprotective and sort of not giving her the respect as the Avatar that she deserves, that she can handle herself, that yes, you can be involved in the fight, but you don't have to just like guard in front of Korra the entire fight. She can be just as valid of a fighter as you can be in the fight. I don't really buy into it that much that that's what's happening here, but there's an element of it that he's just like, he felt the need to jump in to protect her, and she's trying to, I suppose, make the point in a lot of these early episodes that, no, I'm the Avatar, and while I know I still have a lot of development to go through, my point deserved to be listened to, and my decisions shouldn't be just made for me by everyone else, especially decisions that are about me but I have no involvement in. And that becomes a bit of an issue, towards the end of this episode, in the next episode, of just like sort of Tenzin sort of feeling like he can make decisions for her, and her just being like, no, that's not how this works. And that's, again, where her frustration comes from. But what turns her around and really like makes her even further gravitate towards Unalaq is when he's the only one able to quell the spirit. And it's an amazing scene. This is really well animated when he uses this spirit bending for the first time. It's a beautiful like water bending technique. The spiral kind of helix type pattern around it, then kind of making it glow and kind of guiding them off into the spirit world to kind of purify them. Because this is obviously our first, I suppose second time, because we saw one at the start of the episode, seeing a dark spirit. And here's how you sort of purify them back to being, I suppose, a normal spirit. Very cool technique, and just immediately establishing that here's someone who actually knows about the spirits, has techniques that relate to the spirits, and talks about spirituality and the spirits in a much more open way than anyone else. In that Unalaq throughout this episode constantly is bringing up the idea that the South has lost its spirituality. In the North, we have this amazing like place where we are spiritual. You know, what about the days when spirits danced in the skies and the elders communicated with the spirits? That doesn't happen anymore here. That's what we've sort of lost. And this is the core of Unalaq throughout this entire book, is that all of the Korra villains have their ideal, and there is a positive to that ideal, but they take it too far. And Unalaq's positive ideal is he just wants the world to be more spiritual. He himself is spiritual and knows a lot about it, and he feels that it would be a benefit to the world if everyone was at least a little bit spiritual, learn to respect the spirits a bit more. He just takes it too far in terms of almost basically trying to help the spirits take over the world a little bit, with Vaatu at the lead. And you can see like the manipulation kind of starts immediately, like looking at him that like he is the villain of the book. He's clearly manipulating things. He's telling Korra all of this sort of info that he has that she doesn't know, that's turning her away from her current mentors and is pushing her towards him. But it's also the sort of stuff that, yes, Korra is ultimately sort of manipulated into doing this stuff by Unalaq, but come the end of the book, the honest spiritual training that he has to give her to get her to a point where she can accomplish what he needs her to accomplish turns her into a, she actually learns how to be spiritual from Unalaq, even though she's learning from the villain, because the villain needs to get her to the point where she actually is spiritual. And this is what's so interesting about this book, in that it comes down to her big decision at the end of the book to obviously keep the portals open. But she only gets to that point because of her interactions with Unalaq. And I think a lot of these early moments when Unalaq isn't so like heavy-handed with maybe some of what he wants to do with the spiritual stuff, and is more just talking about the basic ideas of what he feels the world needs to get to become more spiritual. Those are sort of the ideals that Korra takes on board. She, by the end of the book, can see the benefit to what Unalaq was talking about, but understands where he went wrong. So that's what I find so interesting, because like he's revealed, of course, to be the leader of both the northern and the southern tribes. It's sort of also at this point we don't quite get it yet, but that like, okay, Tonraq is from the north. He has an issue with his brother. And very clearly, without saying as much, they sort of point out to you the difference between the two of them. Tonraq's more physical, sort of brutish in a way, isn't spiritual, doesn't really care about spiritual stuff at all. Unalaq is spiritual, but is also exceptionally powerful, as we kind of learn. And I love that immediately you can tell that there's something pretty heavy going on between these two. This isn't like a Tenzin and Bumi situation where it's just Bumi tends to like annoy Tenzin because his personality is so like over the top. This is like, no, like Tonraq kind of hates Unalaq. He's not happy about this at all, and that's why he tries to almost step in between like Korra and Unalaq almost any time they talk, and you can see sort of the flaws of that sort of ends up pushing Korra more towards Unalaq. As for, I suppose, the romance stuff, I talked about it a little bit. It's pretty good here, because like they bring up an issue of just Korra sort of getting a little bit annoyed at Mako for, I suppose, from her perspective, just basically telling her what she maybe wants to hear, or not giving her sort of useful advice. But by the end, I think she accepts that, like, yeah, like I was sort of taking it out on you a bit because you couldn't give me the advice that I felt I needed, but he's there to support her, and I suppose it's her kind of, she's in need of this kind of mentor that will kind of respect her, and Mako's one of the people who will respect her. He just doesn't have these sort of skills at this point in time to give her the advice she needs as the Avatar, whereas Unalaq sort of to a degree at this point is. It's just as we see, as we learn over the course of this book, the one thing Korra sort of loses sight of is that like Unalaq in the end, at the end of the day, doesn't actually care about her all that much as a person, whereas her father and of course Tenzin actually care about her, and it's this acceptance of like she still is going to need a mentor who is just a more experienced person who can help her just as like a person, as a friend, you know, as just a mentor, not in some specific kind of like bending discipline or technique type thing. I suppose one final point on the fight scene as well. I think the only problem I have with the fight scene is that it sort of diminishes the Avatar state, because she pummels the spirit with Avatar state like firebending and stuff like that, but it seems like it doesn't do anything. Whereas like I think that the reason I bring this up is because she then does like the same things to like Vatu, and when she fights, and Vatu starts like, you know, coming to pieces, like bits of him start kind of like, you know, fading away and coming back like spirits, whereas this spirit basically seems almost like invincible. And I think it fundamentally comes down to the fact of like we don't really see too many like fights with spirits in the physical world, and so it sort of works a bit differently fighting them in the spirit world versus in the physical world. But I think it's a little inconsistent about like, shouldn't it have started like sort of like fading away and bits of it kind of coming back, just to show a little bit of damage that like the Avatar state hurt it. But still, it shows, I suppose, to a degree, Korra not really handling the spirits all that well, and especially Tenzin trying to come in and just talk to it, and him just getting batted away. It was a good example of just all my other mentors failed in this situation, and then the new guy who wants to teach me had the exact solution I needed. That's a technique that I need to learn if I want to excel at the spiritual side of being the Avatar. Asami and Varric, we get a little bit on that. We get introduced to Varric and Zhu Li. And I think it's so interesting to look at Zhu Li's first episode and see where, by the end of like season 4, she's just this completely different character because of strong development in season 4. Mainly accomplished by like not really using her all that much as a character here, not really having her talk all that much, just kind of being Varric's assistant and being associated with the like do the thing kind of gag. But they do such a good job at like later on in the series developing her into an actual really good character. Varric's always fun, I think. I think they find a really good role for him in like the books after this. In book 2, obviously he gets his chance to sort of be a bigger role. He kind of ends up being a villain. It's not the best arc in this book, but I think they do a pretty good job at it, at just kind of getting across, like, here's this very unique character who you sort of look past as being any sort of a threat because he's so goofy. Like, he's a powerful businessman, of course, but he's so all over the place that you're like, there's no way he could be behind any of this, and so it is a bit of a shock when the reveal eventually comes out. But it's just the fun here of, I suppose, Varric seeing something in Bolin immediately, even though Bolin doesn't make any effort to try and impress Varric. He just kind of ends up being praised by him for no reason. But the praise from Bolin ends up getting Asami the deal that she wants, which is that Varric is going to help her company with shipping. The issue, of course, is going to be that I think the deal ends up getting Future Industries too linked to Varric, and he ends up using this to kind of take over. This is where I think some of the issues with Book 2 start to come in that the Asami arc, I think, ends up falling a little flat, because it ends up being more of a, like, Varric's arc and then like Mako's arc rather than Asami. Asami just ends up like having stuff go wrong for her in a way in this book, and that's really the only result of anything that goes on here. It's just she gets into this business deal, the business deal ends up going wrong, some romance stuff with Mako, that doesn't quite happen or anything like that, and then she's sort of involved in the action stuff at the end, but not really. And that's it for her. Like, there's no real development or big takeaway from her after this book, because they never cover what happens. They never cover like how she gets her company back in between like book 2 and 3 or anything like that. So it's a plot point that doesn't really go anywhere. I suppose the only result is that, like, I suppose Asami ends up getting like maybe a little bit of Varric's company by the end. That kind of gives her the what she needs to kind of make Future Industry successful again. But again, it's such a small plot point. It makes just like Asami's barely involved in book 2 like at all. And like Asami and Korra like really don't interact all that much this book. That'll be an interesting one to see, because I'm even struggling to remember like any times here. I know they say some things to each other, but it's not notable at all as far as I'm aware. But anything else about this one? I suppose just, you know, Unalaq again. I really like the character. I like that just he immediately comes in, and you know he's the villain, especially like if you've been following the show, because just the promo material made it very clear Unalaq was the villain. But I don't think you immediately in this first episode know that he is the villain. I think you maybe get some impressions from him just because like Tonrock is being very cautious around him, and then some of the stuff that he talks about when it comes to like, okay, the South isn't spiritual and I'm contemplating the North, you know, like we're not going to stand still anymore and we're going to do what we have to make the South spiritual again to fix this. That he's kind of contemplating already that I'm going to have to make some harsh actions to make sure that the South becomes spiritual again. And you could see that there's definitely the potential for some kind of stuff to go wrong here. But we'll of course get to that. I think episode 2 is a much stronger episode than this first one. But I still think this is an okay start, because it gets straight into the idea of spirituality, that Korra doesn't necessarily have that. And here's someone who can honestly teach it to her. Whereas Tenzin now is going off on his own. He's in this sort of like low moment of like, he's frustrated because he's not enjoying having his brother and sister around. He's forced to bring them on this trip to the air temples. But that's interesting. Tenzin going to visit the air temples to kind of just reflect on things with his family. It's setting up this kind of more personal arc for him away from Korra. And it means that what we get throughout book 2 is a lot of individual sort of character arcs for some of the main cast, that when they come back together, their relationship is just in this much better position because they've developed on their own, have seen sort of like the error of some of their previous interactions, and can benefit from that going forward. And that's what we're going to see over the next couple of episodes. But I think episode 2 is very strong. Episode 3 and 4 is a very strong two-parter when it comes to like family stuff. We'll get into 5 and 6 as, in my opinion, the weakest parts of book 2. And then we'll progress from there. But that's my thoughts on Rebel Spirit. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the first episode of book 2. Also, let me know what your thoughts are on Studio Pierrot. What are your thoughts on that different animation studio? Do you think it's a problem, or do you, like me, kind of like understand where it came from and sort of give them a level of respect for the situation that they were put in? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.